Hello, welcome back. It's a nice, warm day today, and I have a window open in the living room. I live right next to a road. I hope that we don't hear any cars or motorcycles going by outside while I am recording this video. If we do, I apologize. And I hope that the sounds of those vehicles are not too disruptive. Today, I'm going to be reading more from Tolkien Gateway.net. It has been at least a year since I read anything about Tolkien's Legendarium on this channel. When I do, those videos are usually my least watched, but I like Tolkien, so I'm going to keep doing them. Today I will be reading about Balrogs, and as usual, I want to disclaim that I will be using something between Tolkien's intended pronunciation and a normal modern English pronunciation. Namely, I will be using alveolar flaps, ra, ara, ar, instead of trills for r's. All right, without further ado, let's get started. In Utumno, he gathered his demons about him, those spirits who first adhered to him in the days of his splendor, and became most like him in his corruption. Their hearts were of fire, but they were cloaked in darkness, and terror went before them. They had whips of flame. Quenta Silmarillion, of the coming of the elves and the captivity of Melkor. The Balrogs, or Balrogath, or Balrog kind, were Maiar, corrupted by Morgoth during the creation of Arda, who cloaked themselves in shadow and flame, and carried whips and swords. Famed Balrogs included Gothmog, slain by Ecthelion, and Durin's Bane, slain by Gandalf. History. Balrogs, also called Valar Aukar, were originally Ainur, created by Ilúvatar, probably those who joined Melkor during his discordance in the music of the Ainur. After entering into Ea, they were Maiar, lesser spirits at the service of the Valar. Of the Maiar, many were drawn to Melkor's splendor in the days of his greatness, and remained in that allegiance down into his darkness, and others he corrupted afterwards to his service with lies and treacherous gifts. Dreadful among these spirits were the Valar Aukar, the scourges of fire, that in Middle-earth were called the Balrogs, demons of terror. Valaquenta, of the enemies. They took the forms of demons with hearts of fire and whips of flame. Melkor gathered them about him until the fall of the two lamps, or rather, after the fall of the two lamps, and they dwelt in Utumno. When his fortress was destroyed by the Valar, the Balrogs fled to the west and hid in the pits of Angband, awaiting their master's return. When Morgoth and Ungoliant escaped from Valinor many years later with the Silmarils, the Balrogs were still waiting their master in Angband. After Ungoliant threatened Morgoth, his cry was heard by them. Then the Balrogs issued from their hiding place and traveled to Lammoth like a tempest of fire. With their whips they destroyed Ungoliant's webs and made her take flight. The Balrogs were first encountered by the elves during the Dagor Nuin-Gileath, the battle under the stars, before the First Age began. After the victory of the Noldorine elves over Morgoth's forces, the elf lord Feanor pressed on towards Angband, but the Balrogs came up against him. He was surrounded and fought long enough against them, or rather fought long against them, before being mortally wounded by Gothmog, Lord of the Balrogs. Though Feanor's sons fought off the demons of fire, Feanor died of his wounds soon after. During the wars of Beleriand, Morgoth only came out of Angband on one occasion. Instead, he sent the Balrogs to fight and lead in battle. 2 of them were killed in the fall of Gondolin, Gothmog by Ecthelion, and another by Glorfindel. After the War of Wrath, some Balrogs escaped the destruction of Beleriand and hid deep underground in inaccessible places at the roots of the earth. Only one Balrog appears after the defeat of Morgoth. In the Third Age, the dwarves of Khazad-dûm unwittingly released the Balrog, afterwards known as Durin's Bane, while mining for Mithrin, and were driven out of Moria by the creature. Encountered by the Fellowship of the Ring, it was faced by Gandalf, and the 2 Maiar slew one another. Now, I would be remiss in talking about Balrogs if I didn't mention the controversy about their wings, or their lack of wings. So I'm reading from another article now. It is called Balrogs/Wings. The description of the Balrog in Moria from the Bridge of Khazad-dûm in the 5th chapter of the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, raised the question of whether Balrogs were winged. There are 2 references in this chapter. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like 2 vast wings. Suddenly it drew itself up to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. Tolkien's language leaves some room for speculation. The first quote seems to describe a Balrog covered in shadow that appears wing-like and is later spread. However, the second quoted passage seems to indicate that this Balrog had actual wings that were spread from wall to wall. Arguments for Balrog wings. The most common reference for winged Balrogs is the vast wings language in the bridge of Khazad-dûm. The plain language here explicitly refers to wings. Another Tolkien reference may be taken as evidence of Balrog wings. Swiftly they arose, and they passed with winged speed over Heathloom, and they came to Lammoth as a tempest of fire. That passage is from Morgoth's Ring. This is either a metaphor for moving very quickly or a literal reference to physical wings. It is this issue over the verb to fly which is mostly at the heart of the Balrog debate. Another oft-quoted example from the appendices. Thus they roused from sleep a thing of terror that, flying from Thangorodrim, had lain hidden at the foundations of the earth, since the coming of the host of the west, a Balrog of Morgoth. Appendix A, Durin's Folk. Arguments against Balrog wings. On the other hand, the explicit reference to wings of shadow leaves open the interpretation that Balrogs had no physical wings. Balrogs were never exactly described as flying in any of Tolkien's works, including the winged speed language quoted above. Furthermore, at least 2 Balrogs fell to their ruin, apparently wingless. Many are the songs that have been sung of the duel of Glorfindel with the Balrog upon the pinnacle of rock in that high place, and both fell to ruin in the abyss. Quenta Silmarillion, Chapter 23, of Duor and the Fall of Gondolin. I threw down my enemy, and he fell from the high place, and broke the mountainside where he smote it in his ruin. The Two Towers, Chapter 5, The White Rider. Some think the strongest objection is the simplest, that taking references like the second statement seriously mean that all lines must be taken literally. For example, shortly before the Balrog's appearance, quote, Gandalf came flying down the steps and fell to the ground in the midst of the company. End quote. So we are left with some uncertainty about whether Balrogs had wings or not. Tolkien left many things undescribed. He hinted at aspects of his world, and the hints that he gave imparted to his Legendarium the illusion of depth. Now, as I am done reading about Balrogs, and as I have mentioned him already today, I thought I would read from one more article. This article is about Ecthelion, an elf with what I think is a pretty cool name. And high and noble as was Alem-Makil, greater and more lordly was Ecthelion, Lord of the Fountains, at that time warden of the great gate. All in silver was he clad, and upon his shining helm there was set a spike of steel, pointed with a diamond. And as his esquire took his shield, it shimmered, as if it were bedewed with drops of rain, that were indeed 1,000 studs of crystal. Unfinished tales of Duord and his coming to Gondolin. Ecthelion was an elf lord of Gondolin, leader of the people of the fountain and slayer of Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs. He was also at one point the warden of the great gate of Gondolin. Ecthelion had the most beautiful voice and greatest musical talent with the flute of all the people of Gondolin. In the year First Age 472, Ecthelion fought alongside Durgon in the battle near Naeth Arnadiad, leading a wing of Gondolin's forces. Upon the defeat of the Noldor, he defended a flank as Durgon retreated. Surviving the disastrous battle, Ecthelion returned towards the hidden city, where he next appeared as Warden of the Great Gate. 23 years after Nirnaeth Arnadiad, Duor and Voronwë traveled towards the hidden city. After being led by Alem Makil through the 7 gates, Ecthelion appeared before them. He is portrayed as great and lordly, all clad in silver, and having a bright glance. Upon his helm there was a spike with a diamond point, and he bore a shield which shimmered as 1,000 studs of crystal. At first denying passage for Duor, he allows it after the latter shows the arms of Vinyamar and mentions Ulmo, saying that the Lord of the Fountains should not oppose the Lord of the Waters. In the year First Age 510, Morgoth attacked the city. Ecthelion battled there against Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, in the place of the fountain, where they slew each other. His death is only mentioned in the Quenta Silmarillion, but the own text explains that much more is told in the fall of Gondolin. And the fall of Gondolin is the 3rd chapter of the Book of Lost Tales, Part 2, which is I believe a 2-volume compendium of notes and sketches of ideas. Tolkien's son collated and edited after Tolkien's death. The Book of Lost Tales, the 2 books comprising them, published posthumously. Tolkien was a prolific writer, but not a prolific publisher. He had a lot of different ideas, and he tinkered with them for most of his life. Tolkien didn't study to be a writer. His profession was philology. That is, he studied folklore and language in folklore. Writing was just a passion. He was I believe his former publisher called him a talented amateur. And he made some amateur mistakes. And one of them is tweaking ideas with no intention or with no mind toward reaching any kind of goal. And I'm aware that that was some bad grammar. But my point remains. It's important for a writer, and this is my opinion, as a writer, it's important to make your ideas solid, to reify them, to make them concrete and settle on them. Because if you don't, you can tweak them forever. Even after The Lord of the Rings was published, Tolkien considered revisions. He started stories that he never finished because he got distracted by new ideas. This is common, especially with amateur writers. And it's too bad that he had such trouble making his ideas real, settling on something and writing more books. The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings are the only Legendarium books he completed and published while he was alive. It's interesting that we think of him as a genius, and he was a genius, and we think of his Legendarium as so huge. But there are really only two definitely canon books. The Silmarillion was compiled after Tolkien's death by his son Christopher. And Christopher had to use his own judgment when it came to certain aspects of Tolkien's Legendarium, because he was faced with a mountain of incomplete ideas, revisions upon revisions. He was confronted with his father's own chronic indecision in compiling the Silmarillion and other posthumously published works like the History of Middle-earth and the Children of Húrin and stuff like that. If Tolkien had been better at deciding what he wanted to be canon and letting his decisions be and putting them in books that he published, there might not be controversies and questions that can never be answered. Like, did Balrogs have wings? Or what happened to orcs after they died? Did they go to the halls of Mandos? Did they vanish into the void? Did they become nothing? Did they have Fëanor or souls, like the other children of Ilúvatar, the elves, the men? We'll never know. But sometimes the speculation is even better than the certainty. I want to thank everyone for watching these videos. I know my channel is small, and that's okay. I appreciate every last one of you. And I hope that I can give you some relaxation. Until next time, thank you for listening, and have a nice day.